nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam Sri Radhika prana nata pada sarojayo yena premanubhutyasya dattam tam Shri Gurum bhaje Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitam Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kedato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulavam mṛduni patyakshito Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupo Bhutanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Adadana-strīṇāṁ dantayir yacheham puna puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhulisyam Janma Janmani Abhira Pali Patiputra Kanta Dasya Bilashati Balashvavara Sri Rupa Chintamala Sapti Sangsto Matsvanta Durdanta Hai Churastam Raganugami bhajano lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya sahasara smaratam brajendhum Shri Rupa pada kamala shrita cheta samme Chittam satam madhukari yatu pada padme Bhakterya nikilarta varga jananiya brahma sakshat kriter Anandati shaya prada vishaya jat sukyat vimuktir yaya Shri Radha Ramanam padam bhaja yugam yasya mahanashrayo Ya karya vrajalokavat gurutara premnaiva tasyai namah Yaramya nikilagha shanga shamani shrotratritim sangata Yasvadya rasikai sukabdi janani dhikarya mukti spriham Yadhyata hridaye vrajendra tanuja premamrita syandini Saji yadhari bhakta vrinda mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Maha Sagar, Shri Gauranga Maha Prabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire on this earth, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again, today we continue our discussion of Padyavali, and in particular, we're in this section on entreaties or prayers offered when offerings of food are being made. So in the verse 116 that we're discussing now, the prayer is made that as, O Krishna, as you took pleasure in the food offered by the wives of the brāhmaṇas, may you also take pleasure in the food offered by me. So we're looking at a summary of that Leela in which the wives of the brāhmaṇas made their offering to Krishna in the 10th canto. So we went through that last time, and we saw how Shukadeva Goswami himself was astonished by this Leela to see how Krishna took on this human-like play in accepting this offering, and how he personally fed the foods to his friends as well as partook of it himself. And we left off with Chakravarti Pad's elaboration on the inclusion of the word cha to imply that Krishna was saddened to not fully reciprocate with the entirety of the Brahmani's desire, and thus he ate the food even though he wasn't feeling so happy at the moment, or although it was necessary for him to decline to reciprocate their desire in full, because it wouldn't be appropriate from the perspective of the relish of rasa, or because it's not suitable for those of the mentality and cultural role as well as cultural attitude of brahmanis to have such relations with him as a gopa. Nevertheless, he also could feel their disappointment, so this saddened him to some extent. But Chakravarti Pad said that nevertheless he still ate the food, even though he wasn't feeling so happy. And the idea being that he wanted to favor them, he wanted to honor the food that they'd lovingly offered him. So that's where we left off last time. So we have a few more points to discuss on this topic. And then we'll come to the next offering mentioned in the verse we're talking about. So I'm picking up from where we left off in the last file, about just a few paragraphs from the end of the file. So Krishna sends them back, and they were afraid that they would never be accepted back. In coming to him, they had taken the ultimate risk, so to speak, of neglecting the prohibition on going to see him given to them by their husbands, fathers, brothers, and sons. But Krishna assured them that they wouldn't suffer any difficulties as a result of not coming to him, as a result of having coming to him. So we'll see how that plays out. After the Brahmanis returned to their husbands realized their mistake and came to a proper understanding by the influence of the association of their wives who had received special grace from Bhagavan Sri Krishna. So this is Jiva Goswami's interpretation, that if Krishna is assuring them, why your husbands won't be upset, but what will be the effect, or how is it that the mentality of the husbands will change when the wives have just gone up neglecting their prohibition on what they were doing, and then how is it that now when the wives come back they're fine with that? So Jiva Goswami takes it that these wives had attained Krishna's prasad Krishna's grace in such a profound way that that would flow through them, or the influence of their companionship, or the effect of that grace manifest in their character and in their person, would then further pour over and influence the mentality of their husbands. So he uses the phrase sat buddhi, that when someone has, you could say, proper consciousness or the right understanding, that the effect, as an effect of the companionship of that person, a right understanding comes to others as well. So Sri Sanatana Pad reasons that this occurred because the ill inclinations of the brāhmaṇas were destroyed by their wives' association, or because bhakti appeared in the brāhmaṇas' hearts as a result of Sri Krishna accepting the food brought to him by their wives, or because of the transformative influence of meeting with their wives after their wives returned to the site of the yajna following their meeting with Krishna. So the effect of their food being honored by Krishna, or the effect of the association of the wives, these are, and the purification of their hearts as a result of having that effect of the association of their wives, or of Krishna being pleased with the food that came from them in some way, even though they didn't even want to offer it. That's also an interesting implication, that even though the Brahmins were against offering the food to Krishna and wouldn't give him any of their own accord, nevertheless they got purified because Krishna still somehow got that food and ate it. So Sri Shukadev Goswami Pad describes the repentance that then arose in the Brahmanas' hearts as follows. Seeing the women's otherworldly bhakti, that should be plural. Seeing the women's otherworldly bhakti to Bhagavan Krishna, and themselves devoid of that, they became repentant and condemned themselves. Quote, "Fie on the triple birth, fie on the education, fie on the vow, fie on the great learnedness, fie on the family, and fie on the rights and expertise of we who are utterly adverse to adhoksaja. Aho, see the deep bhav for Krishna, the master of the world, of even these women. Their bhava which severed the fetters of death, known as home." So they become, in other words, deeply impressed or amazed by the devotion of their wives. When they see the extent of their wives' sacrifice, this causes them to rethink things and to realize that they were actually in error. So they're ultimately deeply reverent of the bhav or the bhakti that their wives had for Krishna. Sri Sanatana Pad and Sri Jiva Pad following him explain that the qualifier otherworldly in the aforecited verses indicates that the Brahmani's bhakti was free from regard for this world and the next, meaning worldly prospects in this life and the next. So you might take the word alokiki to mean transcendental or otherworldly in the sense that it's spiritual, and it's not that that's not the case, but Sanatana Gosvami is emphasizing that by calling it alokika, it means that they've, so to speak, transcended in the sense that they've become fearless and disinterested in all these things of the world, such that they're ready to bear any consequence in the midst of that. So it's one thing to say, oh yes, we want a transcendental aim, provided when we get it, we're not going to remain in the world or have to deal with anything of the world thereafter. But it's another thing to say, we're bent upon this, we're intent upon this so greatly that even if we have to remain in the world and undergo all kinds of worldly difficulties, we'll still remain engaged with that, or we're still ready to bear those type of difficulties for the sake of that. That's a far stronger conviction. So that's another sort of otherworldliness. In other words, it's an otherworldliness which doesn't actually take one out of the world, but what can actually give one strength to undergo everything of the world. So you might call it, something more profound or something more, intense in its greatness. So Sri Swamipad and Sri Chakravartipad following him also explain that the brāhmaṇas at this time accepted their wives like gurus. The brāhmaṇas then marveled at how they did not recognize Bhagavan or attain firm bhakti to him, even though they were twice born, learned in the Veda and engaged in meritorious rites. Yet their wives, who were neither twice born, nor learned in the Vedas, nor direct performers of such rites, did do so. So we had a very elaborate conversation some time back about jati buddhi in regard to Vaishnavas, and we had a lot of discussion of the Upanayan Samskar and what it means to be twice born. And we showed meticulously how this is eligible only to persons of particular birth in particular varnas, and also how it has no direct bearing upon bhakti. In other words, the fact that you become a twice-born doesn't mean that you have uttama bhakti, or even that engaging in the responsibilities of the twice-born will result in you attaining it. And moreover, that you can attain uttama bhakti without ever being twice-born at all. So here you have a vivid instance of this, where the wives who are not twice-born attain bhakti that even their husbands, who were twice born and learned in the Veda and all of that, even though they had all of those things, they didn't attain the bhakti that their wives did. So this is also a vivid illustration of the fact that whether or not one is twice born or receives the Upanayan Samskar has no direct bearing on or any type of direct causal benefit towards attaining uttama bhakti. And moreover is obviously not a requirement or not essential for anyone to have. So the Bhagavatam goes on to say, speaking on the behalf of the husbands, about their wives, although they have neither the samskar of a twice-born, nor residence with the Guru, nor austerity, nor self-inquiry, nor cleanliness, nor meritorious rites, still they have firm bhakti to He of highest praise, Krishna, the Ishvara of all masters of yogas. Whereas even we who are endowed with the samskar of a twice-born and so forth, do not have bhakti to Krishna. So in other words, they don't have the Upanayan samskar, they didn't go and live at the Gurukul with the Guru, they didn't engage in tapasya, they didn't learn the Upanishads to engage in self-inquiry, they don't follow the same rigorous degrees of, sadachar and cleanliness and repeated bathing, and they don't conduct yagyas or all these things, but they have bhakti that we don't. This is what they how they then realize, these wives are actually our gurus, or we should actually learn from them. They have something greater than anything we have, even though we have all these things that are conventionally considered valuable in our culture. Elaborating on points made by Sri Jiva Pad and Sri Chakravarti Pad, Sri Baladevibhushan Pad explains in this regard that the cause of the Brahmanis' bhakti to Sri Krishna, unbeknownst to their husbands, was their regular meetings with ladies traveling between Nandishvara and Mathura, who would rest in the courtyards of these Brahmanis, and while doing so speak about Sri Krishna's figure and qualities. So this is a very nice point. In other words, if the Brahmanas are saying, well, we have an Upanayan samskar and we do yajna and all this, but we didn't attain this bhakti, then one might wonder, well, how did the wives get the bhakti? So earlier it was said that they would hear often about Krishna and had such great desire for Krishna and devotion to Krishna by virtue of hearing. We heard that in the last class. But then you might say, well, where did they hear about him? Who told them about them? Because it wasn't their husbands. So here's the answer, according to Baladevibhushan, that this place of these Brahmanas was in the Braj Mandal, near to the city of Mathura. So between Nandishvara, meaning Nandagram, where Krishna and lived at Nandagaon, and between the two, between Mathura and there. So the women of Krishna's village or of the surrounding villages near Krishna's village, when they would go to Mathura to sell their wares or their products or what have you, then the homes of these Brahmanis was on the thoroughfare between those two places. So they would offer their courtyards, or they would offer some place to rest to these other women who would travel between. And in the course of that, they would have Krishna Katha. So, this was not any formal class. There was no Vyasa Asam, there was no text, there was no Vandana, all of these type of things. This was natural conversation that they would, seat them nicely as, not exactly neighbors, but, regional community members, and they would just talk. And they would talk about Krishna, and this itself was everything that it took for these Brahmanis to become profoundly devoted to Krishna, such that they, reached a state of intense longing for Krishna that made them ready to forsake everything else of conventional value of the world. So, one of the things that this Leela illustrates is the power of Harikatha and the transformative significance of hearing about Krishna, and that itself, Shravan itself, is a means of bhakti whereby one can attain siddhi, even without doing kirtan and smaran or archan or all these other things. So just this practice of hearing about Krishna, hearing about, as he says here, his figure and qualities, his rupa and guna, just hearing about these things can purify the heart completely, can elicit such a deep degree of longing and devotion. So, having acquired bhakti by means of sadhu sangha in this way, the Brahmanis greatly pleased Sri Krishna with their offering of food to him when they finally had the chance to personally meet him in the forest, and they vividly express their Oh, sorry, that should be, and then vividly express their immense eagerness to serve him. So that's what I have as a summary of this Leela in chapter 23 of the 10th canto. So Krishna took such pleasure in this offering of the brāhmaṇas for the aforesaid reasons. So I'll move now to the next file, which is also in the folder, and the next mention of the next offering in the verse, that of Vidura. So, the verse under discussion next mentions the moderate food of Vidura, mṛduni vidurānne. So, vidurānne, the food of Vidura, which was mridu, and I've rendered that here as moderate. And some might more conventionally interpret that to mean light or meager even, but I've rendered it as moderate, and I'll explain why as we look at the relevant passages. So, first of all, the background to this offering. After the period of exile imposed on the Pandavas by Duryodhana, the Pandavas returned to their homeland, but Duryodhana not only refused to return the reign of Indraprastha to them, but remained unwilling to grant them even 5 villages to live in. The Pandavas turned to Bhagavan Sri Krishna, and Sri Krishna journeyed to Hastinapur as an envoy with the aim of effecting a peaceful agreement between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, led by Duryodhana, for the sake of averting a war between the two parties. Sri Krishna met Duryodhana in his palace, which resembled that of Indra's in its opulence. Thousands of kings and other persons of prominence accompanied Duryodhana, who arose and received Sri Krishna with honor upon his arrival. Duryodhana offered Sri Krishna a finely decorated golden sofa to sit on, worshipped him there, and placed numerous residences in the whole of his kingdom at Sri Krishna's disposal. He also invited Sri Krishna to dine, but Sri Krishna declined his offering. When Duryodhana asked Sri Krishna why he did not accept the foods, drinks, garments, beds, and so on offered to him, even though he is conversant with dharma and artha, as well as a relative, friend, assistant, and well-wisher of both the Pandavas and the Kauravas, Sri Krishna explains that envoys eat and accept full worship only after completing their missions. So it means he's arrived, Duryodhana's offering all of these things, and Krishna's not accepting them. He's saying, I haven't come here to effect the agreement that I came here to effect, and without that I don't want to accept any of these things. Duryodhana replies that he has no enmity or conflict with Sri Krishna, and rather is pleased with Sri Krishna and trying to honor him. So, Sri Krishna should not speak in this way, and instead accept his offerings of food and so forth. Sri Krishna, as though laughing, then replies to Duryodhana as follows. So this is a fairly well-known passage in the Mahabharata. He says, neither out of desire, nor out of anger, nor out of enmity, nor for the sake of wealth, nor because of a dispute, nor out of greed, shall I ever forsake dharma. So essentially Krishna is teaching, don't forsake the dharma for any reason, for your own gain, or because you're angry, or because you're having some problem, or you're greedy. Don't let yourself forsake dharma for any reason. And then he says, specifically relevant to our theme, foods are to be eaten out of affection, or to be eaten when in distress. So this is a general principle. In other words, eat if you're starving, or you're hungry, or you really have to, or eat out of affection. In other words, eat among those with whom you have affection, and eat in the spirit of affection. Neither are you affectionate, O king, nor are we beset with danger. So he's saying, these are the two times in which you eat. when you eat out of affection for the person who's giving you the food, or you eat because you're starving or you're in danger. So I'm not in danger. In other words, I'm not afraid of you at all. And you're not really giving to these things to me out of affection. So therefore I can't eat your food. O king, without cause, you hate the Pandavas, your brothers, who, since birth, have been amiable, compliant, and endowed with all virtues. Furthermore, hatred of the Pandavas without cause is not right. Who can say what against them, the Pandavas, who are fixed in Dharma? One who hates them hates me. One who is with them is with me. Know me to be possessed of oneness of heart with the Pandavas, who are adherent to Dharma. They say, one who, acquiescing to desire or anger out of delusion, hates and contends with a person endowed with virtue, is the lowest of human beings. So in other words, if someone is good, but without any cause you hate them, just because you are angry with them or just because you have some ambition to fulfill, then that shows a severe lack of character on one's own part, or that person is here said to be the lowest of human beings. One of uncontrolled mind and uncontrolled anger, who only out of delusion and greed wishes to see relatives, endowed with auspicious qualities, does not remain in prosperity for long. So he's saying to Duryodhana that, yes, you're honoring me, you wish to see me, you've invited me here, you're showing all of this honor, but what are you actually motivated by when you're doing that? So he's saying, one who has uncontrolled mind and uncontrolled anger, in other words, you, who are excessively ambitious and unnecessarily angry with the Pandavas, only out of delusion and greed wish to see relatives. In other words, it's only out of your own greed and the delusion that's the basis of it that you're receiving me here and showing me offering me all of these things. So, such a person does not remain in prosperity for long. In other words, you're going along in the wrong way, and this is going to cause you to lose the opulence that you have. Alternately, one who with kindness captivates even those endowed with virtue who are not dear to one's heart, long remains in eminence. In other words, one who, even if someone is, not acquainted with you, or not a relative, or not a friend, or whatever, if one honors them and earns their respect with one's own character, that's a real person. So lastly he says, all this food beset with sin is not fit to be eaten. So even though Duryodhana has this excellent, all the royal, fine delicacies that could ever be offered, even though the food is perfect, so to speak, Krishna won't even touch it, because he considers that it is beset with sin. In other words, the motivation behind it is that of greed and hatred and all these other things. So for that reason, Krishna won't touch it. And then he explains, then you might say, he preempts the question, well, where are you going to eat then? By saying, the lone kshatriya's food is fit to be eaten. This my judgment determines to be the right course of action. So I've left this word untranslated because it carries some significance where if you translate it one way or other, you lose a bit. So I'll just explain. Sri Krishna speaks of Vidura when he says, the lone kshatriya's food is fit to be eaten. The term kshatri refers to someone born from a maid, that is, a Shudra mother. Because Vidura was born from the great Rishi Vyas, and the handmaid of the queens Ambika and Ambalika, he was sometimes spoken of or called a kshatri, and this is found repeatedly in the Mahabharata. And you might say, Krishna holds Vidura in such high regard. He considers him so exalted. So why is he speaking of him with this caste label? Why is he referring to him in this way that, highlights the fact that he's low-born in the general sense? So the reason he puts emphasis on this is not because he's hung up on Vidura's caste or he's judging Vidura's caste, but rather he wants to highlight to Duryodhana that just because you're royal or just because you're highborn doesn't make your food worth accepting. And rather, even a lowborn person's food, when they have good character, that's really acceptable, not the highborn person's character who lacks character. So this is why he chooses to refer to Vidura in this way. Or this is what he's implying by using this name. Sri Krishna's purpose in referring to Vidura in this way here is to imply he is not pleased to eat someone's offering merely because of caste considerations, or merely because someone is a royal, or merely because someone is able to make an offering made up of many fine delicacies. Rather, he would prefer even to eat the modest food of someone who lacks the status of an upper caste person or a royal, but is well known to be endowed with great wisdom, character, and conduct. Sri Krishna thus leaves Duryodhana's palace and proceeds to the home of Vidura. So he walks out without eating from this grand assembly. So this is a very bold move, and to reject someone's hospitality like that will definitely feel like a slight or an embarrassment on the part of that king. So, after Sri Krishna arrives, many of the Kurus, including great dignitaries like Drona and Bhishma, come and offer Sri Krishna their homes and hospitality. So all these other royals were present with Duryodhana, so they also come and say, oh no, please come back, or please come to my house, or something. Sri Krishna, however, respectfully declines them all. Then it says, once the Kurus had gone, the assiduous Kshatri, namely Vidura, then worshipped the unconquered Dasharha, meaning Krishna, with all objects of desire. Then the Kshatri offered Keshava, the Supreme Self, numerous fine pure foods and drinks. After first satisfying brāhmaṇas with these foods and drinks, Sri Krishna, the slayer of Madhu, also gave immense riches to these knowers of the Vedas. Then, like Indra along with the Maruts, he partook with his attendants of the fine pure foods of Vidura. So Krishna comes there, Vidura makes a nice offering, and Krishna feeds all the brāhmanas first, and then lastly he eats the food that Vidura offered him. So Sri Krishna is in this way electing to eat in the home of Vidura rather than Duryodhana, demonstrates that Sri Krishna is not pleased by the lavishness of an offering, but rather by the bhakti of the offerer, just as he himself states in this aforesaid verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Quote, even water offered to me with shraddha by my bhakta is most dear. Even a great lavish offering from a non-bhakta, however, leads to no satisfaction for me. Relatedly elsewhere in Srimad Bhagavatam, Maharaj Yudhishthir is seen to later praise Vidura for his immense bhakti. Quote, O Master, devotees like you are themselves manifest tirthas. They make the tirthas tirthas by the presence of the club bearer, namely Bhagavan, within their hearts. So the idea is that Vidura is a great bhakta, so Krishna will accept his food regardless of any other considerations, even if it was far less elaborate or grand than the offering of Vidura. So that was a point that we discussed and that Krishna himself says in the 11th canto when he speaks to Uddhava, and this instance in the Mahabharata illustrates that. So, now a few related elements here to tie up this topic. Although it is not mentioned in the description of Sri Krishna's visit to the home of Vidura in Mahabharata, There is a popular, likely folkloric description, often included in oral retellings of this account, which adds that Sri Krishna arrives at Vidura's home before Vidura reaches there from Duryodhana's court, because Vidura stops on his way back from the court to collect some foods to offer Sri Krishna. When Sri Krishna thus arrives unannounced at Vidura's home before Vidura's return, Vidura's wife happens to be bathing at the time. As soon as she hears that Sri Krishna has arrived, she becomes thrilled and rushes out to greet him in accord with the standard custom for honoring distinguished guests, that they are received outside the home and welcomed inside by the host. She had long wished to have the privilege of personally seeing and offering service to Sri Krishna. And now, when this long-awaited opportunity at last came to her, she became so excited that she didn't even remember that she had been in the middle of bathing when Sri Krishna arrived, and that she was thus not dressed properly as she rushed out to greet him. Understanding the frenzy she had entered out of love, Sri Krishna offers her his own shawl to cover herself sufficiently, and then accepts her welcome into Vidura's home. After sitting Sri Krishna in a suitable place, she rushes to prepare something for Sri Krishna to eat. She first finds some bananas, quickly peels them, and then, with the intention of offering Sri Krishna the peeled bananas, returns and places her offering before Sri Krishna. Unintentionally and unbeknownst to her, however, the plate she places before Sri Krishna contains only the peels instead of the fruits. She had inadvertently cast away the fruits and filled the plate with the peels as she eagerly endeavored to quickly prepare the bananas for Sri Krishna. When Sri Krishna sees the plate and her expression, he immediately understands what had happened and is so charmed by her loving eagerness that he readily starts eating the peels she's offered and even praises their taste. It is at this moment that Vidura returns home and arrives to the sight of Sri Krishna's eating one of the banana peels. Vidura reprimands his wife for offering Sri Krishna banana peels, but Sri Krishna assures him that he feels highly satisfied with Vidura's wife's hospitality. Further, likely folkloric accounts also state that Vidura thereafter offered Sri Krishna a simple meal of rice and greens from his garden. So you'll find in popular tellings of this that Vidura was very poor, he was very simple. When Krishna came to his house, all he had was rice and some greens growing nearby, and that's all he could offer Krishna. So in the verse that we're talking about, when it says mṛduni vidurānne, perhaps the poet writing that verse had this version of the story in mind, that Vidura offered only this greens and rice, in other words, the simplest of meals, because more commonly you would think of the word mridu in that case to mean light or meager. So that may have been what the poet meant. But, as I demonstrated from the account of this that's actually in the Mahabharata, it says in the Mahabharata that he offered Krishna fine foods that were very nice. So perhaps the poet actually had the version from Mahabharata in mind, so I rendered mridu as moderate, which is not outside the scope of what the word mridu can refer to, although it's not the most common way that the word is used. But I thought by rendering it that way you could bridge between this folkloric version and the Mahabharata version, whatever it was that the poet had in mind. And in either case, the main point is that Krishna was satisfied with Vidura's offering, not Duryodhana's, and that Duryodhana's, by any account, was vastly more elaborate than Vidura's, and that despite its elaboration, Krishna wasn't interested in that. He was interested in what was from Vidura, because Vidura was a bhakta. This is the main point. And the point about the banana peels and all that, I looked quite a bit, but I don't find that in any actual textual source. So it seems to be something that emerged from the Mahabharata. And there are many things like this. We'll come to another one when we get to the account about Shabari, where certain passages in the Ramayana or the Mahabharata grew, so to speak, in the poetic imagination of poets. In some cases were poets like Surdas or Balaram Das of Orissa, one of the Panchasakhas of the Oriyan Vaishnava tradition. You can find in some cases in that era where some elaboration or imaginative renderings of statements in the Ramayana or the Mahabharata begin, and then over the centuries they take shape, so to speak, in a way which highlights more pointedly the degree to which Bhagavan is pleased by bhakti, and incorporates some sort of charming or humorous details to accentuate that. So I'm not here to, say these things are not in the official Shastra or come down on that. Those are endearing accounts which are dear to the hearts of many Vaishnavas and have been passed on by many, highly educated Vaishnavas and our Sampradaya and other groups. And, to me, that's perfectly fine. And even if they don't exactly map out onto what's found in the original texts, what's the harm? In other words, they're there to inspire people, to enkindle the, conviction in the beauty of bhakti in the hearts of people, so let them do so. Anyway, whatever it was that Vidura may have offered, whatever the content of the offering may have been, Sri Sanatana Pad states in his commentary on Brihad Bhagavatamrita that Sri Krishna ate Vidura's offering with satisfaction and praised it. So Sanatana doesn't comment on what the offering was, but he also notes that Krishna's taking pleasure in Vidura's offering is something well known. This Leela thus further illustrates that Bhagavan is pleased only by bhakti, and not merely by fine foods, fine cooking, elaborate presentation, or other externalities devoid of bhakti, as was stated earlier with reference to Bhagavad Gita 9.26 and alluded to earlier in Padyavali 8. It should be borne in mind, however, that when fine cooking, elegant presentation, and the like are expressions of sincere bhakti, then they are also greatly satisfying to Bhagavan. So, if someone does make an elaborate offering, it's not that we'll say, this is just some meaningless externality. Whether it is or not is not for us to judge. In other words, how much of what is an expression of bhakti, that Bhagavan knows. So we don't want to, come down on someone who makes some more elaborate offering, but at the same time we want to, in our own life, cultivate on or focus on the spirit of doing whatever it is that we can with genuine bhakti and not seeking to, quote-unquote, enrich the externality with anything that's not in the spirit of bhakti. So if we have to go to means to acquire funds in order to make elaborate offerings in ways that doesn't really support the process of bhakti, then better not to, and stick to what is genuinely nourishing to bhakti and let the external simplicity be as it may, with full confidence that Bhagavan will be more pleased by that than he will be by making compromises in our conduct for the sake of making, external show or external, elaboration to things. So this whole idea of Vidura's simplicity is more pleasing to Bhagavan than Duryodhana's ambitious grandeur is, a very classical theme in all of Hindu bhakti literature across all sampradayas since ancient times. So that's also noted here by the poet in our verse under discussion. So I will conclude here for today. If anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or feedback of any other type, please feel free to share. All right, great. Well, if not, we can wrap it up for today. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties and so on. But hopefully it came out all right, at least for what time we've had. So in our next reading, we'll dive further into this verse. We'll look at the cows and their milk of Braja, and how dear these cows and the milk they produce, which is itself a manifestation of their love for Krishna. We'll look at that in our next reading. So, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.